Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this particular session early in the morning. I appreciate that you're here. And before we move forward with introducing our panelists, I want to make sure that you all know that we have an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. We have 2 microphones that are available, but also you can use our new technology called Slido, which is slido.com, that you can text questions. You would be using hashtag SphinxConnect, and then we're in the Renaissance room. So this session today is on academic activism, rhetoric, or reality. And so my name is Freyja Harris. I'm the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. So again, welcome. I'm joined by representatives of 3 influential music schools. Next to me is Larry Bombach, Senior Vice President of Administration at Curtis Institute of Music. Ara Guzalimian is Provost and Dean of the Juilliard School of New York City, in New York City, and Paul Hogel, President of Cleveland Institute of Music. So thank you all for being here with us today. With this session, we're going to be focusing on how many music schools and conservatories now have positions, departments, and areas that include diversity as an objective. However, many would argue that little change has been made going beyond the slogans and rhetoric. The ranks of music schools have not changed dramatically, and institutions tend to continue to serve those of more privileged backgrounds, as well as sometimes using generalized statistics in reporting success towards diversity. We have asked our panelists today to help us orchestrate a frank and tangible conversation about what can be done to change what we see in the future, including sharing some tangible efforts and changes towards diversity, equity, and inclusion that are underway in their representative academic environments, as well as what they consider as hurdles yet to be overcome. So we will just be going in order of how they're seated for them to be able to share their own personal experiences within their institutions, what things they have put into place, what things they're learning, and what things they hope for in our future. So I'll let you begin, Larry.
Great, thank you. And on behalf of Roberto Diaz, our president, and the entire Curtis community, I just want to wish Sphinx a really great conference, and I'm really thrilled to be joined here in Detroit by so many colleagues from the Curtis Institute of Music. We have members of our senior management team, several faculty members, 9 students, and several alums here in Detroit, and I'm just really thrilled to be part of that larger community. I'm also really honored to have been invited to speak this morning. But I just want to say that I don't purport to be an expert. I'm not an expert in this topic at all, and I will be interested in learning as much from my colleagues on the stage as I am from learning from all of you in the audience with your questions and comments afterwards. The question was posed as around sort of tangible work changes that our institution has made. And I think it's important to understand that at Curtis, we don't think of the work that we're doing in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space as part of a department or as an initiative or a project. It's really a strategy and a priority for the organization. And because of that, we're looking at it from a holistic sense. And I don't necessarily mean holistic in the sense of, let's say, the different demographic parameters that make up a diversity spectrum, but rather holistic in the sense of that it's for the entire organization. So it's organization-wide, needs to be involved in this, and that's all levels of the organization. So all the different stakeholder groups get involved in this work. And I can talk about different examples from the different stakeholder groups and how they are directly involved in this work, but I think just in the interest of time, I'll give 2 very tangible examples. One that I think is really a very simple, concrete example of what we did with regard to our Board of Trustees. And the other is a little bit more complex and has to deal with student recruitment. It's not complex in the sense that you won't be able to do this in another organization. It's just that it takes a lot of work and resources need to be allocated towards it. But the simple side on the trustees. So like many large arts organizations, not surprisingly, Curtis's Board of Trustees is about 80%. Or at least was up to a year ago, was about 80% white men over the age of 65. And that's not surprising. You see that in a lot of major arts organizations. The board had always had it as a priority to increase the diversity of the Board of Trustees along multiple dimensions of diversity: race and ethnicity, gender, geographic diversity, and age. But in part because the governance committee was a subset of the board, and the governance committee is the part of the board that recommends new nominees to the board, they were often sourcing from their own networks, which largely looked like themselves. Compounding the problem is that Curtis doesn't have any board term limits, so you didn't have a sort of built-in turnover mechanism to actually get new people onto the board. So solving that problem, the term limit issue was very simple. We didn't add term limits because strategically we think it's important for Curtis not to have board term limits. What we did was we just changed our bylaws and increased the number of open spots on the board. You can't really do that in an orchestra, but certainly on a board of trustees, you have that flexibility from a governance standpoint. So that was the easy part. Then what we did was, as a staff, we said, look, the trustees want to see greater diversity on the board. Their existing networks aren't able to generate the qualified candidates that they're seeking, so the staff needs to take it on themselves to supply that work. And what the staff first did was we set a goal, and we said, we are going to, at least in this first year, we're just going to identify 5 qualified candidates. We're going to take that upon ourselves. We're going to do the sourcing, we're going to identify them, and we're going to propose them to the nominating committee. And we set the bar relatively low at 5 because we didn't know if this was going to be a very challenging task. And it turned out it wasn't very challenging because the staff, being a little bit more younger, a little more diverse, had other networks, and we almost instantly were able to identify 10 very qualified candidates. And I'm really pleased to report that as of today, so this is just in 1 year, we added 3 of those 10 already to the board. They've been nominated and they've joined the board already. We have 2 more in active cultivation that we hope to have on the board within the next 6 to 12 months. So a really simple, easy thing. The other one is just a little more complex, has to do with student recruitment. So Curtis, for those of you who don't know, Curtis is a very highly selective institution. This year, for example, we have over 1,100 applications to the school, and we're going to accept between maybe 40 and 45 students at the end of the day. So it's highly, highly selective. And as a result of that, historically, the school never felt the need to actively recruit. We don't promote ourselves, we don't do big advertisements, we don't blanket music schools, things like that, because we're not really in the enrollment business. We're not trying to grow the student body. We don't have, it's a tuition-free school, so we're not in that business. So we've never really felt the need to do that. But what we've discovered through actually asking and listening to especially our alums is that we're really missing out on a huge swath of the classical music applicant pool. And to determine this, we wanted to figure out, well, who's actually applying to Curtis? We have just years and years of tremendous amounts of data on our applicants, but we've only kept at least any serious records and looked at the 40 or so that we take in any given year. So we dug up the old files, and now we can look and see different pathways into Curtis. We've identified these are the sort of schools, the teachers, the tracks that people who get into Curtis wind up normally taking. And those are effectively the answers to the test. And how can we share those answers with other schools, with other partners? How can we get the word out that some of these things, while not the only reason you're going to get into Curtis, obviously artistic talent and merit is at the core, but here are some tangible things that we can offer and say, okay, these types of teachers, these types of schools, these are the ones who are doing the training to get students into institutions like Curtis, like Juilliard, like Cleveland, et cetera. The other thing we're discovering from looking at the data is so we've mapped all this data, and we're saying, where are the hotbeds of classical music activity where we're not actually getting any applicants from? That's a big issue, because we know that there are these hotbeds of classical music activity across the United States and other parts of the globe where we're just not getting applicants. And is it because they don't think they can get into Curtis? Is it because there's an awareness issue? They just don't even know about Curtis, that we even exist? All those questions start percolating. And that information allows us to really develop a targeted recruitment strategy, because we're not going to blanket advertisements everywhere and say apply to Curtis, that's a waste of everybody's time. But what we can do is we can target our recruitment efforts to areas where we know there are qualified candidates and put resources there. And it's more than just sending, posting an ad, but it's actually sending people, sending a presence to go to those communities. And probably the best way that we can send a presence as Curtis is through our touring initiatives. We've really increased our touring around the United States and around the world. And when we tour in a location and we start building a relationship in that location, we instantly see the effects from an applicant standpoint. Latin America is a great example. About 10 years ago, we started touring all around Latin America. We've increased the number of tours to Latin America, the amount of time we're there, the locations in Latin America. And when you look at the data over time, the increase in applicants from Latin America has to be correlated to that presence there, that we were physically there. And we followed up, and we continue to be there, and we post videos and share online media down there. So those are just two examples. And
thank you.
Really looking forward to talking more about it.
Yes, that's wonderful. For the benefit of time, I'm going to let all the panelists share, and then we can definitely ask questions, because I have questions too. So go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks so much. It's such a treat to be here, and so thrilling to hear Aaron and Afa's presentations last night. And if you don't mind, a slightly pointed political comment, to be reminded that the true state of the Union is closer to what we saw last night and what we see in this room. So thank you for this very heartening experience. I want to focus on two things and acknowledge something Aaron said last night, which is that excellence coexists side by side with inclusion, that they're part and parcel of the same picture. And so I want to begin by focusing for a second on the highest level fellowship program at Juilliard, in the music program, which is called the Kovner Fellowship. It's the most selective of the scholarship support and fellowships available, and it's merit-based. The gatekeeping is from the faculty, and the faculty collectively in each area have to designate that an applying student, it actually says on the audition form, represents exceptional musical merit by the standards of any year. So our acceptance rate is about 8%, and this is the top 10% of the 8% that are that enter the school and receive very significant support. I'm very happy to report that 6 of the 54 students in the Kovner Fellowships currently are African American, and actually 5 are African American and 1 is French African, and they represent strings, violin, viola, cello, a bassoonist, and 2 singers, so that the reality and the goal is visible and tangible there. And in presenting a positive report, I want to be really realistic. There's still a long way to go. But the results are actually there in really glorious musicians who are making a difference in these settings. So now I want to switch from, in a way, sort of the end of the young musicians' early developmental arc of reaching a conservatory program, and go back more to a foundational and bridge level, and talk about our key effort in this area, which is a Saturday program called the Music Advancement Program, which is for 70 talented young people who, and the program is specifically designed to represent and draw from underrepresented communities. The artistic advisor of this program is Anthony McGill, the great principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic. And Anthony himself is a product of a similar program called the Merit School of Music in Chicago. And he talks very eloquently about, as a child, having gone as a young African-American musician to a school where he saw people who looked like him and who had mentors who looked like him, and opened the door to possibilities. And his presence in the program is not symbolic or cosmetic. Anthony, despite his New York Philharmonic schedule, is in there many weeks of the year teaching clarinet class. He goes out to the schools, he meets with the Parents Association, and he is such a formidable representation of the possibilities. Who are the students in the program? Currently, I mentioned it's 70. It's strings, winds, percussion, and composition is the program. 37% are Hispanic, Latino. 30% are African American. 14% identify as multiracial. 17% is Asian or Indian, and then a smattering of other categories. There's a very strong parents association that's active, and part of the program, the design of the program is that the parents are integral to their children's involvement. And the curriculum, of course, focuses on traditional things like a private lesson, studio class, pretty rigorous music theory and ear training, but also a couple of unusual elements. Regardless of each individual's discipline, the entire student body comes together to form a chorus. And that meets every week and also performs as a chorus both at school. All of this takes place at Juilliard, and the major performances take place there, but they also perform around the community, and there's a particularly close relationship. The chorus is singing at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. And all of the students are required to do what's called the Artist to Citizen project, which is taking what they do and engaging a community and creating a project. And I was so heartened to hear Aaron talk about the importance of writing yesterday. They're required to write an essay about the project they created and the results they had. And of course, then there's string, wind ensemble, orchestra, composers forum, chamber music, etc. So rather than just talk, I wanted to show you 3 one-minute videos that have been very effective recruitment tools. And I should talk for a second about recruitment. A lot of it is just walking the pavement in the neighborhoods of New York, going to schools, going to community music programs, going to the El Sistema type of community orchestras, community music schools. New York City public schools that do have some foundation of music programs, and encouraging some of the most promising kids to come from that. But word of mouth and one family telling another family is one of the most powerful tools. And then social media and the presence and the transmission of these videos. So the first video is with Tito Munoz, who's now the music director of the Phoenix Symphony, who himself is an alum of the Music Advancement Program. So if we can have the first one.
Number one is the supportive environment in the middle of this Lincoln Center Juilliard situation, which can be so intimidating if you've never been in it before, to even hear the level of musicianship in the hallways. And if you've never been in it, it can be very intimidating. But MAP itself is so supportive, so nurturing. The parents are great because they're all coming from the same situations. Many parents who've never done music before. My mom, when she started bringing me to the lessons, she ended up becoming the president of the Parents Association because she was very involved and very interested in the whole thing. So that was one aspect that I think was very, very special. The other one was the level of faculty, the level of the teachers, which is, for similar programs elsewhere, I think it's second to none. The type of education you get prepares you for college, it prepares you, the theory program, the ensembles, and then access to Lincoln Center, access to all of the major cultural institutions of New York City. You don't realize that you have that until you leave.
Sorry, you're going to hear Beethoven 7 3 times. The next one is with Bert Mason, who's the trombone faculty member.
I think it's a really interesting vibe. The students are busy. They have regular school things. They have extracurricular activities at school. They decide to dedicate their Saturdays here. And faculty are often busy also. Everyone can be fatigued at some point, but it's just interesting when everyone comes in through the door, they're like, we're here. Maybe it's just the atmosphere of being in Lincoln Center that gives you that extra boost. But as soon as everyone comes into the door, they come into the lessons, the energy level goes up, the faculty feeds off the students feed off the faculty, and we start the day. There are private lessons in the morning in theory and those kind of things. And then they'll start the large ensemble rehearsals, but there's also chamber music. There's a chorus also, which I think is very, very important. As an instrumentalist, you have to be able to sing and carry a tune also, not just on your instrument. So there are many offerings that happen, both large ensembles, small ensembles, as well as the private instruction that they receive.
And the last one is a recruitment video featuring a parent and a child in the program.
Pues yo diría que aparte de que obviamente esta es la mejor escuela musical del mundo, y que es una oportunidad increíble para cualquier niño venir aquí. También las perspectivas que se le abren a los niños, aún los niños que no quieren ser músicos profesionales, y si un niño ha logrado mantenerse en un programa como este durante años y mantener una disciplina musical de este nivel, cualquiera de las mejores universidades de este país y del mundo quiere un niño así, se va a pelear una persona así. Así que pues aparte, claro, las becas y todos los demás beneficios, el solo hecho de que un niño que pasa por esta experiencia va a ser un adulto con unas perspectivas, unas destrezas mentales, una cultura mucho más avanzada que los demás de su edad, y va a poder abrirse en un campo profesional, va a tener una experiencia de vida mucho más variada y mucho más enriquecedora de lo normal.
And where do these kids go? Currently in the Juilliard pre-college program, which is extraordinarily selective. There are 12 MAP alumni, but that's not the only measure. Over the years, dozens more have gone to the Manhattan School pre-college program, the Mannes School pre-college program, LaGuardia High School, the Performing Arts High School in New York City, Carnegie Hall's NYO2, the National Youth Orchestra 2, and other programs. So I loved the imagery that Afa used yesterday of helping make change incrementally, one starfish at a time, and I love our very beautiful starfish in the MAP program. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Paul?
Good morning. No. Good morning. Thank you. A little call and response, please. I've driven a long way. I don't know if I believe in karma, but 2 years ago, when my dear friend and boss, Ann Parsons, was on sabbatical and I was pretending to run the Detroit Symphony, I was on a panel at SphinxCon at the book Cadillac. And I remember making the following statement because I wrote it down. I said that the problem with diversity at American orchestras was clearly a problem of the pipeline and should be placed squarely at the feet of American conservatories. Little did I know, 6 months later, I would be leaving 30 years of service to orchestras and running one of America's important conservatories. And I've learned a lot along the way to that journey. The first thing I learned is that you really can make significant changes very quickly when you have a team around you that is interested in that change. I remember interviewing with the board in Detroit early on, and at the end of the session, in Cleveland early on, and at the end of the session, they asked me the perfunctory question if I had any questions for them. My daughter had graduated from the Institute in 2015, and I remember grabbing the end of the table and wondering which of my two prepared questions I should ask, the really softball one or the one that I knew would take the air out of the room. And of course, I went with the air out of the room question. And I said, when my daughter crossed your stage in 2015, not a single graduate of color graduated from the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I'd like to understand what you as a board are doing about that. Dead silence. We have a lot of women, female students was the answer. That was the answer. We've come a very, very long way since then, and I'm going to talk about those things quickly and then get to our questions. The first thing I learned is you should have really great partners, and I think in the room today is Dr. Joyce Griggs, who was and is my partner in this work at the Institute. We began a journey that we thought could be done quickly because we felt it in our bones, we felt it in the faculty, we felt it in the CIM community, that some model of diversity, equity, and inclusion was ripe to mature and be pursued in Cleveland. We did everything we thought would be helpful as quickly as possible. We signed up for a new relationship with Sphinx to bring their summer program to Cleveland. We welcomed the TDP program from Atlanta and 8 or 10 families for a almost half a week-long visit to Cleveland. We've begun discussions with Play on Philly to bring their folks to Cleveland for visits. We sought and received major funding from both the Gund Foundation and the Cleveland Foundation for pre-collegiate preparatory minority artist fellowships, where we could be a pipeline to ourselves for our pipeline. And the result of all this talk and pursuit and conversation and trying to hold ourselves accountable, the incoming class of 2017 was the most diverse in CIM's history, where 10% of an incoming class of 130 students were brown or black, which is unprecedented for Cleveland. The sad thing is that there were 26 beyond that who won admission to Cleveland but could not afford to come. Now, it's really easy for all of us white administrators, particularly in Cleveland because we're all white, to think that, well, if it's a minority target group, it's a need-based. The reality is that the kids who get into Cleveland, and of course these two other schools, but they're highly fought over. I talked with almost every parent, particularly freshman parents, who we were recruiting last year. This is a negotiation for them. I don't know if you guys have this experience. This is all new to me. So when a parent calls you and is haggling over whether they want floor mats or wiper blades with their new car, you kind of expect it, but when they're haggling over a few $1,000s for college, it's kind of stunning. For us, those 26 kids that got into CIM were accepted into someone's studio but could not afford to come is purely economics on our part because somebody else gave them the proper scholarship level that we could not afford to give them. So I could have had 40, I could have had 20% of the incoming class be black or brown, which is exciting. There's clearly talent there to be held. Joyce and the school have now begun a journey, a year-long journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion with our board and with our faculty, with the end goal of having a statement, an aspiration statement adopted in May at the board meeting of what we want to accomplish. It's been one thing for me to kind of ram this through as the new president, and everybody nods their head on the team and says, oh yeah, this is great, you know, go, good luck and all that. I wanted us, and Joyce wanted us, to have something in writing where we kind of went through the process of putting words on a piece of paper and saying, here's what we actually want, and here's why we want it. I'll know we have gotten closer. I have no doubt that the auditions that start on Sunday, that we will repeat next year's class, because everything we calibrated was to attract that level again. However, on the recruitment of faculty, particularly faculty side, we are light years away. We have 2 openings for theory faculty out of 5, so 2 of 5. And the process, of which I'm about to see finalists, produced 5 white males. And my faculty looks at me and says, well, you don't understand the numbers, and these are the people we know and the schools that we're comfortable advancing. And I don't really care, of course, but that doesn't help them. So we're working with our board to have policies that we can't have a search that ever looks like that again. That's the way I know how to make it happen, is you gotta create it at the policy level so that the practices that we all then observe can be played out. In closing, I'd say what drives us and what I've told our faculty and our staff, the reason why this is such an obsession for me, is that there are 3 imperatives, and I've said these before. First is the immoral imperative. At the school level, at the orchestra level, we are not prepared to serve our communities as everybody looks like us. We should just accept that as obvious. The second thing, which attracts some of my board members, which is great, there's a business imperative. If I can help CIM be a community of people who don't all look like me, it will mean that they won't choose these 2 schools. Now, I want them to do well too, because we're in service of an art form together, and that's good, but I will steal every student they get if I can. And they will too, so that's okay. But there's a business imperative. I have to fill 130, and we're getting smaller, by the way. We just announced that we're moving from 430 students to 350 and smaller, so we're gonna be even more competitive. I had a 12% increase in admission applications this year. It's gonna be harder and harder and harder. But there's a business imperative, so every seat needs to be sold. And then the third one, which I also said before, is that there's an artistic imperative. And I make the statement that sometimes plays well and sometimes is confusing, that art is just more interesting in color. I think the pursuit of our art form is more interesting when we don't all have the same worldview. And so my trustees seem to have bought into that direction, and now we're trying to get it to play out. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll take your questions.
Thank you all very much for sharing the things that are already underway within your institutions. And if the audience doesn't mind, there are some questions that are shared here that I think are similar. And so I'm going to kind of broach those, and they actually include some of my own questions as well. So the first question, as we talk about recruitment, whether it be within your board or within your students, bringing the people into the fold is one thing. The other side of it is how they feel once they're there, and the processes of ensuring that they are feeling included in what goes on within board decisions, within what happens in the classroom, that they see it as a place that is for them. It's great that they made it, but then once they're there, they still need to feel like it was just as much for them as for anyone else. So if you'd like to just share from a perspective of board as well as students, that is fine. But
I can briefly say that we've made significant strides this year in really empowering the student body and the student council, creating more safe space opportunities for them to speak up and tell us what's going on. And we provided them real public forums to do that, both with administrators and then confidentially without administrators in the room. And we've also added students to several board committees and staff department monthly meetings in order to make sure that we're getting the student perspective at all times. At the end of the day, that's our primary beneficiary, that's who we're serving, and we need to make sure that we are asking them what's going on, listening to their answers, processing those answers, and then ultimately acting upon what we heard.
One slice of the answer to that, and it's unusual and really heartening, and it's a reflection of the times we're in. You won't be surprised to know that conservatories historically aren't a hotbed of political activism. That's changing quite dramatically because of the rather extreme times we live in, and you might be surprised to learn that there is a thriving, active questioning Black Students Union at the Juilliard School. And they've organized fantastic events around the school. They've been challenging where challenge is necessary and questioning. And it's really enlivened the school atmosphere. So I think that's, and it goes across the board, but in some ways the Black Student Union is the most vocal and visible, and it's a wonderful turn of events.
I think there's three things worth thinking about. The first thing is that not everyone's experience is that they want to think of themselves as different than the, quote, majority. I talk with our students, and the advantage of our relative sizes is that we're statistically really small. So we actually can have relationships with students. If I'm at Ohio State, there's 50,000 kids that you would never meet. Some don't see themselves as anything other than a violin player. That's their identity. So as an administrator, you have to keep that in mind. Not everyone walks into my school and says, oh yeah, I'm a Black tubist. And I have one, so. The second thing is, I talk to our Black and Latino kids particularly that you are pioneers if you want to be. This is hard work. There's no way to not have that conversation. You are in a building where almost everyone doesn't look like you. And you don't have to accept the role of a pioneer, but you at least have to acknowledge that there are pioneers that are helping that process. And if you want to, you could be a real force for good in that process. And the third thing is that there is, I admire the organization because we really don't have that. Our school partner at Case Western has that, and some of our kids do participate in that. But there's a lack of a community. If you are seeking a community, it's much more common in our Asian students for them to clump and cluster together and seek out cultural things that are make them feel at home than it is for other members of our community. And I love that idea and wish we had it.
Another common question is in regards to what is taught. So the curriculum, the repertoire, is it reflective of the diversity that you're seeking in your students so that they also see themselves in what they're learning?
No. The honest answer is no. I just read a wonderful piece in the New Yorker about Florence Price, and listened last night on YouTube to her second violin concerto, and it just, we've got a lot more work to do in this area.
What are some of the hurdles that you are experiencing? You know, I can tell it's something that you would aspire to make happen. So what would be some of the opportunities as well as obstacles towards diversifying the curriculum and the repertoire?
This is going to sound like a harsh answer, but you have this option too. At our school, our students can take any class in the Case Western Reserve curricular catalog, and they have a full, very wide music program. Most of the kids would tell you that they don't want to. That they come to a school like CAM or Juilliard or Curtis to become better violinists, become better trumpet players. And while they may have curiosity about other art forms, everything that takes away from being in that practice room is often considered a distraction. And so they even try to fight that conflict within their soul. I have lots of interests personally, but my watch only says I have this much time. I don't know if you guys have that experience or not.
We have a similar relationship with Columbia University, and a reasonable number of our students do take courses at Columbia across a wide range. But I think I agree with Paul that the real answer is to change the offerings under our own roof, and not rely. I mean, we should be teaching a course on African American classical music, just to open up this repertoire. And I was very inspired by this encounter with Florence Price, whose name I knew, and I had to acknowledge until last night I hadn't heard a note of her music, and this article prompted me to.
Well, there are actually a couple of questions in regards to your MAP program. in terms of the trajectory for these students, of seeing them as professionals who could then become faculty, who could then advocate for more diverse music, their own music for that matter. And so the question is, through the MAP program, are you seeing this not just as a recruitment for your school down the road, but also for a recruitment into the profession?
Yes.
That these are truly,
Yeah.
okay.
It's meant as a bridge program to prepare a student to enter a larger scale program. And it's meant to seed the profession. It's existed for 27 years. It was founded in 1991 by the current president of Juilliard, Joseph Polisi, who's retiring in June, and the title of his book is Artist as Citizen, so the Artist as Citizen project is an homage to him. And it's gathered a lot more energy in recent years, and particularly with Anthony McGill's leadership, but the intent is to prepare a student to enter another setting and effect change in the various places where these kids end up and grow to become leaders. And an early example is Tito Munoz, who was a MAP student, who talked about his mother being the head of the Parents Association, and the Phoenix Symphony has a Hispanic music director. What a wonderful thing.
Thank you. Another sort of key theme is in regards to, I'm trying to think of how to present it. As you bring in just people of diverse backgrounds, regardless of race and gender, and you're trying to help people to feel and to relate to each other in new ways, are there things that you're doing in terms of training your faculty, your staff, your students, in what inclusion really looks like? It's a word, and until you act it out and you have some experiences and some guidance, it can stay very abstract. And so are there things that you're doing within your schools to make it beyond a word and help people understand what that looks like in real time?
Speaking from Curtis's point of view, we've made a major investment this year in having a year-long dialogue among the senior staff, the entire staff, and the student body. And this is step one. We eventually, next year, are going to figure out ways to involve more of the faculty. It's a little challenging at Curtis because our faculty is so transient. They're all part-time. And we need to find that opportunity to get them all together in the room at the same time. But at least between the administration and the student body, that community building is happening through a series of facilitated sessions, not just one, but an entire year's worth of sessions. And we come together at the end of the year as a community to share what we've learned. And we're using the same facilitators for both, so that information is shared between. And it's been a really eye-opening experience, I think, for all of us on the team. And I think what it's doing from internally at the schools, it's really raising just awareness that this is an issue. We have to address it. And by simply talking about it more, it's making us far more comfortable to deal with it head on. And you start seeing people changing their behavior. And because that's supported at the top of the organization, from the entire senior leadership team and the president and CEO, people feel very safe moving forward with this work.
That's wonderful to hear. Like to share?
I think the difficult journey that schools are going through on Title IX issues right now, self-inflicted in many cases, is helping us feel comfortable talking about issues that are more complicated, and this is complicated. I don't know if there is a hashtag movement that could sustain the Me Too movement in this area. Maybe it's us too. But we definitely need something that galvanizes and unifies us internally. It's very helpful. All the presidents get together twice a year to talk about a range of issues, including issues like this. But the reality is that this is all politics are local. What happens in your building, on your campus, with our students' experience. And once you develop the skills of being able to talk about one complicated issue, you can often lateral that discipline and those muscles to talk about other complicated issues.
And I would only add that we have a similar range of issues, a lot of initiatives, a lot of them under the leadership of the school's diversity officer. But in some ways, the most heartening is all of the programming initiated by the students, because the students become the teachers. And you know, whether it's gender fluidity, microaggression, whatever the topic is, when a student says, when somebody speaks to me like this is how I react, they're the teachers.
Yep.
And because of the political activism I mentioned, there's a much more open environment and an open forum for that to be voiced.
So you said you have a diversity officer. Do the other two schools have something similar?
No.
So you use outside facilitators, as you had mentioned?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'll mention that the inspiration for bringing in outside help came from a dialogue that our alumni began. They said, we want to speak to you about this. We listened, and we acted upon what they told us to do. And I thank the alumni, many of whom I met a year ago here at Sphinx, for really bringing this to the attention of the administration.
Well, actually, brought another good point. The use of alumni, those that have gone through your program and are out and now doing their, doing the work and what they actually see and what they want to see in the future. Do you utilize that alumni in terms of recruitment and talking about, the future of the profession?
Yeah, most of our trustees, if they haven't served for a long time, think that just like their other colleges, that our alumni are the primary source of revenue. And after I stop laughing when they say that, we then pivot to talk about our alumni are our single best source of attracting the next generation of students. So that's how we use our alumni in that recruiting and advocating and being kind of standard bearers for us. You both laugh, so you must agree with me on that topic.
Well, that's good to hear. There's a couple of specific questions I wanted to maybe present. There was one in regards to the board and looking at diversification. The question was regards to financial. As oftentimes boards, they bring a certain network, and so how does that play into your search for board members? Is it you're still looking at a particular socioeconomic group but also looks more diverse, or is it covering more than just racial or gender diversity?
At this time, no. We are still looking for board members who will be able to give at the level that we require at Curtis, but we believe and we've seen evidence that there are very qualified candidates of color out there who meet this criteria and can join the board. And until that changes, which I have no reason to think it will change, that is still the strategy, and it works. Paul brought this up. There is a false dichotomy that people of color are also socioeconomically distressed. And while there's obviously a Venn diagram there, and there's a big overlap, we can't just assume that everybody who's a person of color is also poor. It's a terrible assumption to go into.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on some of the more specific questions as well. Did anyone have questions they wanted to present? Yes.
Start with the easy ones, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm really glad to be here. I made a few comments last night. This particular one is dear to my heart. When you said activism and academics, they got to go together. They got to go together. I teach career and technical education. So what I've been involved in is bringing students from other disciplines in the building together under the guise of, hey, we can give you a video. We can give you good sound. We can give you good lights. We can give you good projections. So all the things that are happening here, I'm training my students to do that, but I'm inviting the other students to come and participate. What I'm finding is the students I'm training to do the tech support learn to love the music. In St. Louis, for a year now, we've had the National Blues Museum. And our performance space has all of these same features. So one of my internship components is to take the students there and teach them how to do the tech support. Well, if you can imagine these high school kids, some of them I bring when I'm doing sound for all the blues artists that are coming to town. Next thing I know, they starting to figure out the blues. My point is this: what's needed is exposure and access. The sooner, the better. The other thing is, it's kind of like sometimes you're trying to fish with poles and hooks when you really want to use a net and pull all kinds of, folks in. And what I mean is, I don't know if you've heard of Take Me to the River. It's a program where they're combining the old heads, like me, and the young heads, and we're all working together to produce the performance, okay, whether it's blues or some jazz or some quote-unquote classical. And so what we're finding is it's about pulling young people together with the veterans to share history and experiences. And so even though you might focus on classical or jazz, have some blues, have some hip hop. If you pay attention, there's more groups coming out and they're performing with live musicians. And I had my little guitar one day, and these rap artists were in there, and they said, hey man, that's happening. And so there's this respect for music. I talk too much, but I just want to thank you for listening. I also do a program called the Incubator Scientist Program, and we had 3 principles: deep immersion, intense nurturing, and relentless caring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marquis Wincher, and I'm a tenor trombone student at the New England Conservatory. So I just had a question regarding the, lack of diversity in classical music. So basically, one thing I find really interesting is that whenever, discussion of, lack of diversity in classical music is talked about, it's always from the perspective of, that there's not enough representation in, across major symphonies. But what I wonder is that solely the issue of the lack of diversity, or is it also, something that's less talked about, the perceptions that people have of classical music? Because a lot of people regard, or people that I met, people I spoke to, they regard classical music as this sort of European elitist art form. And, and I think the way that classical music is marketed also sort of contributes to that, because even, I do some promotional work for a organization out in Boston, and they don't send me out to low-income areas and to hang posters for different events that they have. They send me to the rich areas, So it's what are we doing to break down that barrier, or even how are we rebranding classical music so that people don't have these perceptions, and then believe that they believe that it's accessible to everyone.
Well, I'll tackle the first one, and then they can answer the real questions. Your question about the diversity of big American orchestras, when you have a section violin audition for a major orchestra, Boston, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, and you have 250 people show up and only 2 people look like you, the numbers are never going to improve on stage. And until the numbers improve on stage, the community is never going to come into the concert hall at Severance Hall and say, wow, that looks a lot like Cleveland. It doesn't. It doesn't look like anything like Cleveland looks. So on that one little dimension, everything you talked about, I think, is part of the contributor before that. But the reality is, when the position is posted and the auditions are held, the numbers just aren't there, which is my speech 2 years ago. Look what that got me.
I'm right there with you. I often commute through Grand Central Station, and there's a large ad for the the classical music station in New York City that says, classical music elevates you, and it just drives me nuts. I'm moved to close to vandalism because
Don't do it.
there are cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
And the headline of Juilliard,
Yeah.
Dean arrested for vandalism, is not
Provost, yeah.
good. But I intensely dislike that notion because if we care about it, it's not because it's, you know, the vitamin that makes life better or the spinach you should have
Right.
with your meal or however you want to treat it. We respond to it because it's a part of human expression, and if it's endured, it's not because it elevates you, it moves you, it makes you cry, it reminds you of your college boyfriend, you know, whatever level of response you have. It enrages you, you know, whatever, you know. I don't think Richard Strauss's Salome elevates you. I wholly agree with you that it's just, and I also have trouble myself with it being somehow the best form of human expression. It's a vital form of human expression. It's part of the larger house of music, including everything you mentioned, which is part of the house of life. And until we all bring it into the same house, we're talking about some tiny, isolated niche, you know, holy grail, which by its nature, forget in diversity, even among rich white people, it's a niche. Sorry, you've pressed the real button for me.
I agree 100%. The only thing I would add is that I think collectively as institutions, conservatories, orchestras, we all need to do a better job commissioning and presenting new music, because that will inevitably diversify the repertoire and make it more accessible because it's being done by people of today.
And I do apologize. I took more time asking those general questions. We actually are out of time, but I want one more question before we conclude.
Hi, sorry. Having too much fun last night with La Familia. My name's Gabrielle Skinner. I'm a current master's student at Rice University, going into a diversity fellowship with New Haven Symphony. My question, I just need a minute of background. I'm so sorry. It's just going to take me a second. I come from a lower socioeconomic family, and my career and where I am at the moment was really built by the fact that many people had empathy for me, and they saw that that girl, when she was 15, was struggling. I was given an instrument. I went to an institution for high school that was free, provided me free lessons and orchestra and theory. And, you know, I met my undergrad teacher at the school, Juris Doctor, and I actually graduated in 2015, and I'm half Hispanic. So I was one of those people that was diverse in my class. And there was only one other student in my class that actually did not get to graduate because he had his own struggles. But I'm wondering, what are we doing to create empathy in our communities? In my group with New Haven, we do go to the schools that don't have money. We have free programs for these students that can't access strings, they can't access music, they can't access instruments. So how are we going to start building more of these programs instead of getting funding from people that kind of just want to have the label of diversity to join, you know, the hashtag?
You need to hear what this gentleman said. He said, go to public school board meetings and argue loudly for the implementation of music programs, and that's a huge part of it. I think it's looking at the entire student and the ecosystem around the students, including enlisting the families or the guardian or the grandmother as recognizing the ecosystem and having them take pride in their, young family members' accomplishment is a really critical piece of it. Because I think if you remove somebody without the support system that's gotten them there so far and isolate them in a situation, I'm not sure you're setting up for success. And I guess, maybe that's one real core definition of empathy.
You would find programs in all of our schools that you would be able to say, oh yeah, that's an example, but statistically it's an ice cube in the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, our kids are at the Cleveland School for the Arts. Many of my faculty volunteer without ever talking about it to teach and help get kids instruments and go way out of their way. We have kids in our prep program, that we have staff members go and drive to their grandmother's house and pick them up after school, feed them so they can get to CIM for their lessons and their theory classes. But it's hard to imagine how you ramp that up to any volume that impacts a school system or a whole community just because of the numbers. But if you looked at all of our programs, you'd say, okay, there's a good example, that's worth studying. But how you would weaponize that in a larger context, very tough.
I think the solution is going to lie in large organizations and local communities coming together in consortiums and really leveraging their resources together. Yep. I echo your point 100%. In Philadelphia, we've got 40% of the public schools, only 40% of the public schools have a full-time music teacher. That's a huge problem. And if Curtis, along with other large institutions in the city, can come together to really move City Hall to make that change, it's going to require those big organizations to do that because we have the clout and the power to do it. We can make that 100%. And that should be a goal for all of our organizations.
Thank you all for sharing your questions. I really do appreciate it. We are out of time, but thank you, our panelists, for all of your insight.